Yeah, you got to emphasize the rogue and not the ones.
The rogue
which
ones.
Which is counterintuitive
The
because the
rogue
movie is definitely
ones.
the one.
Yeah, Rogue One, the Rogue Ones.
Yeah. Hello and welcome to Force for Thought presents The Rogue Ones. I'm Matt.
I'm Luke.
And I'm Max. And today, Matt is going rogue.
Everybody, today I'm going rogue about Return of the Jedi 40th anniversary in theaters. I wanted to leave early to get to the theater to get popcorn and Coke. Turns out they no longer sell cherry Coke at Cinemark.
Really?
And that seems like the biggest travesty I've ever heard of. I'm not
That is
sure why I'm
interesting.
leading with this, but we got there at 4:27.
Because
and,
this is important information. You're a Cinemark guy now? I thought you were AMC.
well, I was a Cinemark guy growing up over in Valley View.
Cinemark gang rise up.
Cinemark, yep. And then when we...
Oh, yeah, Luke worked at a Cinemark, didn't you?
Big fan of
Exactly.
Cinemark.
So was I. And so then when we, in college, we went to Easton, and the AMC was just right there, right? And so that was, I don't know, I'm becoming less intrigued with AMC, specifically at Easton. No one's so limited. Who would be the group of people that would know what that is?
Did the Nicole Kidman ad send you overboard? Is that what it was?
No, I do miss those Nicole Kidman
That would be
ads when
fair,
I go.
though. That would be fair.
I just signed up for Cinemark. It was like a Plus or something, so it's like a
Yeah.
free movie ticket. Free movie ticket. I paid for the subscription, but it's a ticket a month. Anyway, I went to Cinemark in Valley View not that long ago, and then I went to Cinemark over here, and they both no longer have cherry Coke, which seems like a travesty.
That's tough.
Anyway, I like Cinemark better because I don't also like going to the mall at AMC anymore, really. I mean, it's fine, whatever. So anyway, we got there at 4:27. Movie starts at 4:30. I was a little upset, and my wife Lynn was a little confused why we were rushing for a movie that I've seen 1,000 times. And yet, if you missed The Crawl, you might as well go see it again in a different time slot. So I was like, if we miss this movie, I'm gonna have to reschedule another time to go see it. And I think it is still in theaters this week. It started on Friday.
Yeah.
Another bummer besides the cherry Coke, they also didn't have any posters, which made sense because I
That's
went
too
on
bad. I saw people on Twitter were getting the posters.
Yes, so was I. So
Posters was awesome.
I was ready to get one. I was like, I'm gonna steal some for you guys, and I wish I revealed and said, just kidding, I had them, but I don't. They legitimately were out.
It's
Which
a thought
makes
that
sense.
counts. We still appreciate it.
Thank you. I think Mark Ferguson drew them.
I couldn't tell you.
He also did the Empire Strikes Back 40th anniversary, and I believe also the New Hope 40th anniversary, which are all really, really cool posters. And something that I was really excited about the entire, when it was announced at Celebration that was coming back, I also feel like there wasn't enough excitement around going to a movie like Return of the Jedi back in theaters. I mean, it's been out since 1983. And yet I feel like it is a big event because I don't think I've ever seen Return of the Jedi in theaters. And then I was thinking I'm not totally sure if I've seen any of the original trilogy in theaters. For some reason, I want to say I saw A New Hope, but I don't think that's true. Have you guys,
I have not.
Maxwell?
In theaters?
Yes.
No, I don't think so.
Right? It's very odd. And so this is like, it kind of blew my mind. Like sitting down like in the theater, I was like, I don't think I've ever seen any of the original trilogy in theaters. Like, this is going to be a completely different experience for something that I've been experiencing for over 20 years at this point, which is really interesting. And I could not recommend it enough. I don't think that's necessarily a new thought or an interesting thought, but my mind was blown. Like,
Yeah?
something that I think take for granted in general, and we were talking about this kind of off mic, like last week, was some of these new movies going forward, whether it's the Filoni movie or the Rey movie, we were talking if these were going to be potentially streaming versus in theaters. And I think there's like, you can really go either way, depends on what they want. But like, I really would like those to be in theaters again, because seeing The Crawl is just something super special to see. And the music, and then being able to like, I don't know, experience that with like surround sound and like having that music blare, which was great. And honestly, especially the speeder chase in Endor was so good.
Yeah.
That was a highlight for me. I think just like being able to see those and feel those like effects were super, super cool. And I feel like I was talking to my brother about this, my brother Mike. My brother Mitch does not enjoy Star Wars as much as we do. And so I always feel bad if I just say my brother Mike and exclude Mitch. And so Mike saw it last night. It's his favorite Star Wars movie. And which is kind of hard to believe, even though I know it's one of your guys' as well. And he was like, yeah, some of the green screen doesn't translate really well to the big screen. And that's one of my things that I was thinking for CGI versus practical in general, something that Luke and I disagree on.
Yeah,
And
I'm a practical, or I'm a CGI fan. I'm a practical
the truth
hater.
comes out. And I think that all the practical effects, and honestly, even the CGI for, or even like the effects on the green screen for 1983 are fine because that's like built into that movie, right? It's like those are from 1983. We all accept it. It doesn't look great. What really bugs me, which is not a hot take at all, but it is the additions from the early 2000s. Those like nice noodles like coming in, and just like at the end, the celebration of all those different planets that are clearly from the sequel trilogy, the prequel trilogy rather. I keep getting those mixed up today. And so something that I'd be interested in seeing in general, kind of watching this again, was either the original cuts, which again I assume aren't great looking, right? We all kind of understand, but at least it's like it's original content, or if they were updated even further into the more sequel era trilogy effects. Because I think everything has a very prequel trilogy look to it, which makes sense because they haven't been updated in almost 20 years at this point, I believe. Obviously, this is a special edition that came on Disney Plus, but I think in general the effects have not been updated.
So I'm not that familiar with the special edition that came out on Disney Plus. What are the differences between the 2019 special edition and the 97 special edition?
That's something I'm not. Well, the 90s. I think the Disney Plus was the 97 special edition the one with all the effects. I don't think it was, because all that stuff is all prequel era stuff.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Most of it.
I thought
because obviously not like Hayden Christensen or
that stuff was, I believe,
the
Blu-ray release special editions.
Yes, I think 2011.
Yes, those were the editions with all those added effects that look like they're from the prequels. So I don't know what the 97s are, because the 97
was like the Sice Noodles and
Yes.
The Jedi Rocks and the Celebration song and Yub Nub.
Yeah, a lot of that, I feel like it almost would make the edit a little tighter. I know, like, people always say it's George Lucas's original vision, blah, blah, blah. But a lot of it just takes me out. There's a solid 2 minutes of, like, transition scenes that just feel so out of place. Being in the theater, I mean, being at home, I guess it's also, I'm kind of bouncing back and forth here, but, like, it was super nice. And I've been feeling like this about movie theaters in general. I love going to the movies. I love movies in general. But being able to, like, not look at my phone for 2 hours, and I guess if you were, you're kind of an ass, but being able to, like, not look at your phone for 2 hours and just enjoy Star Wars and we do that on, like, a weekly basis with the shows, but it was super, super nice to be able to see that on the big screen. And also, part of me got, like, not nauseous or anything, but seeing those, like, massive space scenes, it felt like I was, like, back on, like, Rise of the Resistance or something, where it's like you can see almost like it's like 90 feet wide of, like, when Lando's flying the Falcon. It just, like, kind of is a little jarring. I was like, oh god, like, I just have to, like, shake my head a little bit to get out of it. But something else I was really focusing on, besides the movie theater experience, obviously Return of the Jedi, we all love it, we all like it. I'm very interested in seeing kind of where it ranks in your top movies eventually as well, in the Star Wars series. But something else I was really paying attention to, and something that really hit me, is the setup they have for the sequel trilogy. And I think in general a lot of people don't like the sequel trilogy, right? I mean, like, I feel like some fans of the original series don't seem too keen on it. And I'm honestly more confused than ever kind of seeing it on the big screen and being able to really kind of dive into that world. Also, going back to diving into that world, and then I'll get back to my other point. The movie's actually really creepy. Like, being on those big, like, on the big screen, seeing those sets, like when Vader's looking for Luke at the end with his lightsaber out, and he's, like, hunting for him, and he's talking about knowing his, like,
and Luke's got his eyes closed
yes.
under the stairs.
Yeah, I mean, that's a
legitimately
legitimately scary scene, and even in, like, the beginning and stuff too, in Jabba's palace.
That's what I was gonna say.
It was
when Leia's breaking out Han, and then you just hear in the background,
yes, I know that laugh. And then, like, but seriously, that set is so creepy, and with the Rancor on screen like that, like, it was legitimately, like, your seat's, like, vibrating because of, like, how, like, loud it is. I'm like, that would really scare me if I was a child, actually. But that stuff all holds up, being practical as well, being the miniatures.
I like the Rancor. Yeah,
there we go. But I really, really like that. Going back, for the Return of the Jedi, kind of setting up the sequel trilogy. I feel like now more than ever, maybe again, this isn't necessarily a hot take, but I feel like there's so many things that I noticed that I was like, I don't understand why people have problems with this. Maybe it's the execution. I'm not saying these are, like, good ideas or the best intentions or the best ideas. But I feel like they were set up, and they obviously took a lot of inspiration from the original trilogy. Even, like, with Snoke, when he dies in The Last Jedi in the throne room scene. I'm like, that is just directly mirroring the Emperor sitting in his throne with Luke's lightsaber next to him. And it just feels like, oh, this is the exact same setup. I know there's not many things that, like, I know it's a bit of a stretch, but I was like, oh, they just like kind of copied and pasted that, and then just turned. What if Kylo Ren actually did kill him? And
that was a big inspiration for Rian Johnson when he did The Last Jedi. I think he said that he really liked the throne room scene in the original trilogy. So when he got to do his own movie, he was like, well, we got to have a throne room scene.
And you can really tell. I don't know why specifically. It was just me, like, maybe because I didn't get a text and checking my phone, but like being able to be immersed in it, I was just like really thinking the entire time about how it clearly affected, again, for better or for worse. The same thing with Palpatine's original intention with Luke. When Luke is just kind of sitting around on the new Death Star at the end, it's like his whole intent is to die and for Luke to officially turn to the Sith and strike him down and destroy him, which is exactly his plan for Rey.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting that's like, oh yeah, like that makes so much sense that would be his original, it was his still plan. Like nothing came of it. So he's going to like the last Jedi, who we at the time assumed was going to be Luke, and it's like the same exact plan. And so to me, that's why I said in a couple episodes ago that it feels like the Palpatine saga, not necessarily the Skywalker saga consistently, because Palpatine is consistently in the background. I mean, he is like the driving force of most of the content, including the Clone Wars, right? Like he's consistently in the background, pulling the strings. Somehow he's coming back. I also feel like they set up Luke going and hiding on hiding in The Last Jedi. I know a lot of people are like, that isn't what he would do, but doesn't it kind of make a lot of sense? This isn't completely like
going back to what you just said. Literally in the throne room, what does he do? He hides from Vader under the stairs.
But even let's go. Yes, exactly. He's consistently hiding, but then even Leia consistently tells him to run away and hide. Consistently, and then not only that, and like yes, Obi-Wan had the goal of looking over him, obviously making sure he's protected, but all he knows, all of his masters at this point do the same thing. Yoda literally hides on Dagobah, yes, in hiding, right, because he's a Jedi, but like he is literally in hiding on Dagobah, which is exactly what Luke would obviously do. The same thing with Obi-Wan. He goes to Tatooine. Obviously his mission is to stay close to help Luke, but in the long term, yes, Luke maybe doesn't see him, even though he kind of knows who he is at some certain point, but like he's also hiding away. And so I feel like, does that not all set up Luke to do what he knows best and what he is taught is to retreat and hide? He tried something. He put his best foot forward and he failed, and he went back into hiding which exactly what happened to every other Jedi before him.
I'm thinking a lot about the line in The Last Jedi, if you strip away the myth and look at their deeds, the legacy of the Jedi is failure. That's obviously true for the prequel era Jedi, but Luke Skywalker also, because yes, he resisted the temptation to the dark side and chose to be a Jedi and redeemed Vader, and they got rid of Palpatine, but then the war didn't end for several years anyway, and then even after it did, there was still the Imperial Remnant, and like we don't know exactly what Luke Skywalker's doing in this period, like during The Mandalorian and Ahsoka, but he did not win the war as definitively as the movie kind of makes it seem. Like even his legacy from this era is still failure.
Yes, I feel like in general failure is a pretty big point for the Jedi, and in Star Wars in general. That's what Max and I always talk about, liking Poe Dameron's storyline in Last Jedi. He fails.
Everyone in The Last Jedi.
Yeah, which is fine, right? Because like I don't know, I feel like everyone gives The Last Jedi. This is now turning into a little bit of a sequel defense, I guess, sequel trilogy defense, which I think is fine. But like seeing this kind of set it up for it makes, I don't know, to me a lot of sense. And then like everyone gives them a lot of gull for the slowest chase, right? Basically, like just the space chase. Like they're running out of fuel, so they're keeping their distance until they run out, right?
In The
like,
Last Jedi, yeah.
In The Last Jedi, yeah. And I think in The Rise of Skywalker too, which I just recently watched again, I think everyone gave it a lot of gull for not wrapping up this 9-movie trilogy. When you look back at Return of the Jedi, they're wrapping up this trilogy for potentially never to be seen again. 1983, nobody knows there's going to be another Star Wars in 20 years, right? Not even. Every time I watch Return, I'm like, it is basically 4 big set pieces, and that's it. A New Hope is kind of the same, but it has this kind of introduction of each character, so you're consistently moving. In Empire Strikes Back, it's this massive movie, right? There's Hoth. There's so many set pieces. There's so many things going on. Everything is we are introduced to Cloud City. We're introduced to Lando. We have consistently introduced new characters, bigger action set pieces, and everything. But in return, it's basically Jabba's palace. We have the Dune Sea, where the Sarlacc is at, and then we practically go to Endor and barely spend any time inside of the new Death Star besides in the throne room. And that's, to me, really interesting because it is literally... And then we have also the Ewoks, like, palace, wooden tree fort as well, which is obviously in Endor. But, like, we only have, like, these 4 set pieces.
Bright Tree Village.
And is that what it's called?
Yes.
All right. See, I knew one of you guys would know it. And so we have only these, like, set pieces, like 3 to 4 set pieces, really, in which these characters kind of live. And I love the movie for it. I love the speeder chase, like I said. I love those dynamics of figuring out that, like, Leia is actually Luke's sister. That stuff is really interesting, but it is odd that, like, I also don't think they wanted a big action ending to it. They were like, this is how the story naturally ends, right? A lot of people were like, how Palpatine returns, like somehow he returned. Like, obviously they glance over that. And yet Obi-Wan does the same thing in this movie, saying that from a certain perspective, that he told the truth to Luke, that
from a certain point of view.
For a certain point of view.
Yeah.
And so it's like, that's arguably a bad line.
So I'm lost. How does that relate to Palpatine in The Rise of Skywalker?
The same thing. People always complain that he returned somehow. And Poe Dameron's line is that somehow he's returned.
Oh, the low effort retcon.
Exactly. And I kind of just like...
There's also the low effort retcon in Return when Luke confronts Obi-Wan. He's like, hey, what the hell? You said my father was dead. He's like, well, what I told you was true from a certain point of view.
They basically like pause the movie for like 2 minutes just to retcon that.
But I think that kind of retconning is kind of in Star Wars lore in general. Max and I were talking to a friend that was talking about how Star Wars is consistently trying to kind of fill in the gaps and make things make sense. But I think Star Wars has always tried to make things make sense because they're just consistently rolling with the punches and creating something new and interesting. And sometimes it can get sloppy, but I think that's the fun of it, is seeing how things can connect and make things fun. I mean, the Clone Wars is just a massive kind of patch. Rogue One, same thing. And yet it's like accepted and loved, and it's great. But I felt like specifically watching Return of the Jedi is that a lot of things were set up for the sequel trilogy. And again, they took inspiration for a lot of them, I think. Whether it was good or bad, I just saw it. And I feel like a lot of people complaining, I don't fully understand it. If you watch Return and are not confused, I feel like it all makes perfect sense for me. I'm sure I'll get a lot of flack for that.
What do you mean confused by what?
Like why they don't like the sequel trilogy, or like Last Jedi, or Rise of Skywalker, or like that, again, that retconning of like somehow Palpatine's returned. It's like, well, as a Star Wars fans, we're kind of like used to that kind of treatment of a story of like maybe nothing holds weight, or like Yoda saying you're the last Jedi, right, to Luke, but now knowing potentially, right, that like Ahsoka is out there and like a bunch and Grogu's out there as well, and there's obviously a lot more Jedi. And my wife also was asking why Yoda doesn't feel any of those other Jedi. So my only response or thought could have been the same thing with like when Rey in Last Jedi is feeling the Force and she doesn't sense Luke whatsoever, and it's because he cut himself off. And I feel like that is like the only explanation or potential possibility, is that
Yoda cut himself off, or all of the other Jedi did?
The other Jedi are cutting themselves off, at least to a certain extent, and can't be felt. Obviously, it's a dangerous time.
Yeah, I could see that.
I think that's one theory. I think, I don't know, even if he did sense the other Jedi, or if he knew there was other Jedi out there, okay, sure, maybe he was keeping that in his back pocket, but I think Yoda clearly knew that this was Luke who was going to have to step in to fix this.
Yeah.
I don't think it was so much as like, I don't know, he wasn't like ignoring all the others as much as he was like, no, I know who can do this. It's going to be this kid. Yeah. He's literally destined for it.
And if not, he's a sister. Last words.
Yeah.
Feels like pretty pivotal information to tell somebody beforehand.
You're speaking a lot of my language right now. So you hinted at it earlier. Return of the Jedi is my favorite. And my second favorite is probably The Last Jedi. So those are like the two movies that we're talking about right now.
Yeah,
and it's right up my alley because I love them both so much. And it's funny thinking about it because obviously we were born after Return of the Jedi had come out, right? So we were born in this world where people just kind of threw these 3 movies at us and said, hey, here's these 3 films. They're great. You should watch them, right? And then we were alive when these other films came out. We were alive during the prequel trilogy, which was just kind of a different era. It was kind of like, the internet wasn't really a thing. We didn't really know immediately people's reactions. And I was 6 years old at the time, so
Same.
I liked The Phantom Menace. It
Same.
wasn't until I was much older where people were like, oh yeah, those prequel movies were kind of bad, right? And then I was like, I don't know, I kind of liked them. And it's the same thing with the sequel movies. Like when I watched the sequel trilogy, I watched them and I like them. Obviously The Last Jedi is my second favorite, and a lot of people disagree and they don't like them, and I'm like, well, this is kind of like the history of Star Wars almost. Like people didn't really like the prequel movies when they came out either, and now they're pretty beloved. People didn't really like Return of the Jedi when it came out. Like when that movie came out following Empire, people were like, oh, okay, that wasn't as good as the others. So it's like, I think it's a very different perspective, waiting for it to come out and like being exposed to it in real time as opposed to kind of having them all just kind of thrown at you at once. Because my feelings on the sequel trilogy is evolving as they're just kind of settling into pop culture. I mean, we're no longer waiting for episode 9. We know what episode 9 was. It happened, and we're kind of living with it. And so it's just kind of different how everything sits with us. Because, Return of the Jedi, I watched the first trilogy, the original trilogy, and that one was my favorite. And it wasn't until much later people were like, that one wasn't really that much. People didn't like that one that much when it came out originally. And I was like, what? Why? And they're like, oh, we thought the Ewoks were kind of goofy. And I was like, oh.
But they're fun.
I don't know. I just kind of grew up with them. They were just a matter of fact. Like, I never even thought of that.
Yeah. I think my basis for liking things in general is if I like something, I'll like it, right? It's your first reaction. I think now it is so easy to be susceptible to other people's thoughts or why something is bad, but it's like if you like it, you can just like it also. I know this is turning into a bit of a weird sequel trilogy thing, but watching Return today really made me think of it. But my other point that I was making earlier, which I completely got off track of, is in Return, it is this 4 set piece type story. And it doesn't feel like maybe a massive conclusion. It does story-wise, wrapping up. Obviously, Vader ends up kind of going back to being good and being back to Anakin Skywalker and defeating the Emperor, and obviously dying. Luke kind of saves the day, and then obviously Han and Leia get together. And so we kind of wrap these stories up, but not necessarily in a grandiose way. It is more of a mission. In the beginning, literally, Akbar and Mon Mothma describe the mission they're going to go on, and then they go do that mission. And that's it. It's not like this massive, massive thing. And in Rise of Skywalker, I think a lot of the reviews when it was coming out was like, it doesn't do it justice to wrap up these 9-movie saga. And to me, it's like, but it kind of follows the same format. You have these 4 to 5 set pieces. You have the old Death Star. You have the planet where Zori is on, which I cannot remember right now. Kijimi, yes. I literally was like, don't forget Kijimi. We have a Kijimi. We also have the desert planet, yet another. But we have these, I don't know, more big. We have these set pieces that are like our characters are able to kind of go and explore. Versus it feels like A New Hope. It's just like this straight line trajectory of you're on Tatooine, and then all of a sudden you're on the Millennium Falcon, and you're introduced to this ship, and you're introduced to the next thing, and the next thing, and the next thing, and it's really interesting, I think. And I love that, and I also love Return, but it is interesting that I feel like people were expecting this massive finale, and it's like, how do you kind of wrap that up? And to me, it's like, oh no, it's like Star Wars has always been about, if you wrap the character stories up, like that is kind of what it is. Obviously, I think they kind of had some hits and misses as well. Obviously, I can be a little pompous and I don't like certain things, which is totally fine. But I am always confused when people don't like the sequel trilogy. I guess is my basis for me specifically watching Return again in theaters and being able to like sit back and be immersed for like 2 hours and 12 minutes, I believe, or 2 hours and 11 minutes, right around there, fully, and be like, oh wow, yeah, I feel like I kind of absorbed it all again as well.
Yeah. I don't like Return of the Jedi as much as you guys. It's one of my least favorite Star Wars movies, probably. But
I don't know. How do you know where it ranks for me, though? I'm very interested.
I mean, I don't know. Definitely bottom half, probably the bottom quarter, maybe the bottom fifth. But I mean, I still like it. But the one thing I did want to mention is we talked about how I generally prefer CG effects over practical effects, and Return of the Jedi is not a good example for that because they had to do everything practical in 1983 for obvious reasons. At least as much as they did. But I do like to bring up the one example of a practical effect that I hate is when they blow up the shield generator on Endor. And you saw this today, so it's probably fresh in your
I
mind.
did.
That explosion is comically large. I think that is so obviously a 2-foot model that they blew up, and it
They use
looks
like
What's
double.
wrong with that?
and it looks like 3 times as much as explosive as they needed. If that was to scale, that thing would have destroyed Endor.
Honestly, that is to me. That's not the worst explosion. The worst explosion is they kill an ATST with the 2 logs, and
Then it blows up.
But not even that. Right after that, the logs fall. And then the one, it trips over the logs like a clumsy ATST, and then it falls and explodes. That's the worst one because there's no need for
Why
that to
does it
explode.
right.
But
It's already
was-
incapacitated for a story element for one.
Exactly. And it
I
was,
disagree with both of these.
you don't think that's a funny explosion?
No, like what?
I'm not saying it's bad. It's funny, though.
What's funny about it? I have no problem with it.
It tripped
falls
over-
over and it blows up.
Explain how that works.
What made it blow up though?
I don't. It's a trope that you see in every movie, right? Like a car falls off a cliff and then it hits the bottom and then you
Exactly.
wait a second
Okay.
and it blows up.
Max.
I don't. You want me to explain like the fuel lines within an ATST and the electric circuitry?
I won't hold
and-
you to it right now, but I would like that.
All right, I'll look up some reference manuals and I'll try to get a cross.
Even better, let me pitch you a quick spec we could write where we write about this character who is an ATST pilot. That's all he ever wanted to do. And he is the pilot, he or she is the pilot of that ATST. And when they're falling, they know that they don't want to let the Ewoks or the Rebels get their hands on this ATST. So instead of falling and potentially getting captured, they blow it up.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's more cynical than that.
Self-destruct,
Yeah, maybe all of them are wired to self-destruct so that the rebels can't get their hands on the property.
Oh, egg on our face. We're complaining about it.
I know. That's what I'm saying.
That's
why
what's so good
Star
about,
Wars,
about
it goes
re-
so
retconning Star Wars as it goes on. 'Cause
Luke,
there's
do
no
you-
way George Lucas was thinking that at the time.
Do you
but-
feel dumb right now after this explanation?
Another thing I would like to mention, because I do like Return of the Jedi, even though it's one of my least favorite Star Wars movies. The thing I like the most about it, probably the element that I rank it highest of all Star Wars movies, is creature design.
Yeah.
I think Return of the Jedi has by far the best creature design as a whole. Introduced us to Twi'leks, Admiral Akbar, the
Dude.
Mon Cala, Jabba. There's so many iconic
Celestins.
Celestins. Yeah, so many iconic aliens that have
Yeah.
been in Star Wars now for years and decades that all started in.
Jabba's
Return
in A
of the
New
Jedi.
Hope, though.
No, he's in the
He was
You see him?
added. He was added.
added later.
That's true. He was.
He was
He was originally a
designed for
person.
83. He was designed for Return of the Jedi.
How do you feel about? I know I touched on this as well. How do you feel about like getting? I don't see it happening either. I wonder if this is in the clause when they sold it to Disney, but seeing those original cuts versus the Lucas cuts from like 97, 2011, all the ones we were talking about now.
I would probably like them less.
Yeah.
I've listened to Yub Nub. I don't like it that much.
Mhm.
I think Jedi Celebration or
I
whatever.
wanted to say the same
Celebration
thing
song
earlier
is
too. I wanted to cut in because even the Jabba's Palace song that they
Mhm.
redid when they added
Jedi Rocks.
Jedi Rocks. That's what the song
that's
is
the name
called.
of the song that Ice
That's kind
Noodles
of a
and
goofy name, but yeah, no, I like that song. And
I
he's
do
like,
too.
He's like I forget the character's name, but he's like singing in the camera's face, and you see his
Mm-hmm.
tonsils as he's
Yeah.
belting out a line.
yeah,
I
that
don't
scene
know.
gets a lot
That
of flack
line-
too. I'm okay with that one. I like
song
that moment.
slaps. I'm okay with
I
it.
also, honestly, I'm indifferent. I would like to see them, but I know they're like, they're just goofy movies sometimes, especially Return. It's just kind of meant to be. But it's always one of those things where like you want what you can't have. So I'd like to see those eventually. But how do you feel about them? Like potentially, would you like them if they updated them a little bit too, to kind of get rid of that
Like
goofy CG?
No, I don't think Disney should go back and touch it.
Yeah.
I'd be okay if they went back and added all the various different edits and cuts of
Yeah.
it. I see. I don't mind when George Lucas went back and he added a bunch of things because I do agree it's his vision. This is his property. He can do whatever he wants with
Yeah.
it. And if technology has evolved after he made it in order to more accurately capture that, even if it's these weird goofy things, that's totally fine. I would take problem with Disney going back and altering George Lucas's vision.
yes,
Yeah.
that's fair. That's different.
Yeah.
Definitely.
But it's funny that you were talking earlier though about like the different set pieces and how you kind of like think of the movie, like breaking it down in that type of way, because I always think one of the reasons I like Return of the Jedi is I feel like it feels like it cuts to the chase because an unpopular opinion.
I dislike it
An
because it feels like a
unpopular
third
opinion
chase.
is that I don't like Empire as much as a lot of other people because of the entire second act. In Empire, the second act, it feels very slow to me the whole time. Han, Leia, and Chewie, C-3PO, when they're on the ship in space, in the Slug, on the Star Destroyer, looking for Cloud City until they get there, and the entire time Luke is on Dagobah. I understand there's very important character development that's happening in there, but like as a kid, I'm watching it and it's just not very fun. It's not very entertaining. And then they finally get to Bespin, and then again, not a whole lot really happens. But it's the second act of Empire that does it for me. And in Return of the Jedi, I feel like there isn't much of a second act. Like to
because
me,
the second act is so boring.
I
It's
break it down-
C-3PO retelling the events of A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back with sound effects.
that's just one scene though. Like I have in my head Return of the Jedi broken down into 2 halves instead of 3 acts.
I think
I just have Tatooine with Jabba's palace and basically the entire third act. I mean, Endor and everything after, which I think is the best. I mean, obviously, Return of the Jedi is my favorite movie. I think it's the best third act. You got Luke confronting Vader on the Death Star. You have the epic space battle, which I still think is probably one of the best space battles. Someone could make a compelling argument for the beginning of the Last Jedi, and then you also have everything going on in Endor. So I think it is.
I think it's really interesting we're also mentioning Return and Last Jedi consistently because I feel like those are like sister movies, right? Like Last Jedi is the goofiest.
There's a lot of influences from The Last Jedi, from Return of the Jedi and The Last Jedi.
It is interesting.
I wouldn't say there are as much sister movies as A New Hope and The Force Awakens. I think those are more directly linked.
Yes,
but
absolutely.
If we were doing a Rogue One, though, about one of those movies, we would obviously be talking about the other.
Yes.
Similarly to how we are with this.
I feel like I didn't want to make this a review of Return of the Jedi because I feel like that is something else we could dive into way later because those are
I just want to say before we move off topic too far, but Max, you were saying that you think that Return of the Jedi is more of a 2-act structure than a 3-act structure. I think you just kind of have yourself convinced of that because the second act is so weak that you just sort of mesh the first half of the second act into the first act and the second half of the second act into the third act so that you don't have to tell yourself that it has a garbage act right in the middle of the movie that just grinds it to a halt.
I'm sure it did. I mean, it's a movie. I know it follows a 3-act structure. I just, in my head, have it broken down into 2 halves. So yeah, I think I have that second act like divvied up and split between the first and the third.
I was also going to mention structure because something about the structure that I noticed which is a little bit of a variation from what it did in A New Hope and Empire, is other they are consistently confronted with problems, right? But there is a solid 10 minutes where C-3PO just refuses to say that those are his friends and need to be let go. And so I feel like and I like C-3PO a lot, unlike you, Luke.
I do not.
I know, he's funny. I can relate to him. He's cranky. He's sassy. I like C-3PO. But I'm like, there's just a lot of the characters themselves make these problems for themselves in return.
Yeah, Chewie goes up to the horse meat.
Exactly. They're the ones who are
He's thinking with his stomach.
Yeah,
Nice.
true. That's what they say.
It's a trap that they set out probably specifically for creatures like Wookiees.
Also, how does no one complain about like Luke makes Han reach for his saber in that trap too?
Because he can't reach it. Like, is there no better way? Or the Force?
Yeah, exactly. But it's like, again, those are people nitpicking. I think is really funny. That's a great moment, too, when he tries to reach it and he's just circling around. But yeah, in general, I was just like, oh, yeah, in return, they kind of make a lot of problems for themselves in this forest. It's like, what can we do in Endor? Oh, yeah, there's a meat trap. They'll get captured.
I think the best scene to encapsulate that is when Luke comes back from the speeder chase and Han and Chewie are just sitting up against the tree and Han does one of those.
Yes.
Yep. Yep. I feel the same way, Han.
It's one of those really funny things when he comes back, and it's like, oh, Leia didn't make it back, and then he was like, yes, we should go look for it. It's like, yeah, you should go look for her.
Right. Maybe leave 1 or 2 people here in case she does come back and start that 30 minutes ago.
Yeah. Which is really funny. But either way, I really like that movie. I'm excited to talk about our top. I know I'm going to be pushing for this in general because I like ranking things, but I'm really interested in everybody's ranking because I'll tell you, I just watched, again, the sequel trilogy, a couple of the original trilogy. I have to go back and watch the prequels, but my list has changed.
Oh, yeah?
Being kind of further away from Rise of Skywalker and having more of a context, I rewatched a bunch of them, and my list has changed a little bit, which surprised me.
Where do you have Return of the Jedi? Broad strokes. Top half, bottom half?
Do you want to know? Do you want to save it?
Yeah. For Return of the Jedi, just, yeah.
It's out of the 9, it's mid half.
Okay. That's fair. All right, we got it right by the top, right by the bottom, and in the middle.
We're all over.
Yeah. For
got
me,
it all covered.
It's mid to high because I really do like. in the theater watching, I was like, I really do like watching these characters specifically. Even if the story isn't my favorite out of the three, it's really fun to watch the three of them, specifically Han, Leia, and Luke, interact with one another and go on this adventure. Because again, even if it isn't this grandiose finale, in a way it is. In other ways, it's not. And it's like either way, it's like this is a fun mission to see these characters kind of go on. So I really enjoy Return. I really enjoy them all, though, to
Do
be
you think
honest.
you're going to rank it higher because you saw it in theaters now for the 40th anniversary?
Honestly, I don't know. Because there's parts of that movie where I am like, oh yeah, like what time? Like it's a little bit of a slog sometimes. But I also really like movies from the 70s and 80s. So it's like one of those things where I'm like, I really like the Marx Brothers and Charlie Chaplin, which can be a little long as well. And so it's one of those things where I feel like I don't necessarily mind that it's like the Act 2 is maybe a little weak. But I think overall,
It definitely has the strongest. It has one of the strongest third acts in
It's-
all of Star Wars. I think.
exactly.
And it ends on a very good note.
and I think
Like
it's,
most Star Wars movies end on a happy note, but
Yep.
Return of the Jedi is definitely the best one that will get me walking out of the theater with a smile.
Yes, because you're also like, where do these characters go after this? I'll never know. And then it turns out, like, a bunch of years later,
Oh, just wait.
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And so it is fun to see those movies again in kind of having the new context with them as well. Anyway, I feel like I'm going long and adding almost nothing new besides maybe episode setups for a couple of weeks from now or whatnot.
Well, hold on, but I want to
yes.
ask real quick. Tell me more about the experience. How many other people were in the theater? Was there any?
Yeah, so I went to a 4:30 showing, which was obviously a matinee, pretty kind of.
It was on a Sunday though, so
It was on a Sunday, and it was weirdly packed.
yeah.
Like I was really
Nice. That
pleasantly
makes me
surprised.
Were people cheering?
Surprised. There wasn't much cheering, but like I which is really interesting.
Which is
besides-
code for Matt was the only one in the theater cheering.
I
Did
was
people
excited.
gasp at the Luke Leia sibling reveal?
No one gasped. No one was as shocked as they were in 1983, I assume. But what was really fun is a lot of people laughed at some things that like I did not particularly think are funny. That's why I love going to the theater in general.
Yeah.
Is people were just like snickering at certain moments where I'm like, oh, it's interesting that you find that really funny. Because like there's certain things I find funny, but there's, I mean, like I was just talking to my brother Mike. I kind of shout out to Mike and Mitch as well. That one of our favorite lines is when he was like, "Oh, Luke, you're here," and he was like, "Oh, how you doing?" He was like, "Oh, and he's like, "Oh, that bad, right?" And it's
Same
like,
as always, yeah.
"Yeah, same as always." That's that bad, and it's like. That's very funny. Like that's a very funny line. So everyone was laughing at that, and so I think the theater experience was great. I really liked it. I was really surprised at how packed it was for 4:30 on a Sunday. I can't imagine how Friday and Saturday were. But yeah, I really liked that experience. I kind of wish, again, it doesn't make sense probably profit wise, but they used to do, I feel like larger events, like when The World's End came out, the Simon Pegg, Nick Frost, Edgar Wright movie, they did the Cornetto trilogy. So it was Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, World's End, back to back in a single day. And I kind of wish they did that with the original trilogy because I would love to be able to go and spend a whole day watching those three movies back to back in the theater. Because it just gives you that context and that appreciation too. So I feel like it would be sweet to see those instead of every 3 years being released. And now I feel like we're gonna have to wait to the 50th anniversary for New Hope and Empire or to be back in theater again. So a little bit of a gap, unless we rent it out.
Not that far away though. Only
Little scary.
4
4
years
years
or
or
so.
so.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, I am glad to hear that though, because to me, Star Wars is it's a community thing, right? It's not, I feel like it's something that's meant to be shared with others,
Yeah.
obviously, which is why we always talk about Star Wars and why we started this podcast. But I was wondering about that because I would love to see Star Wars in the theaters again with the audience cheering and gasping and clapping,
Yes.
like all of the great moments in the sequel trilogy that we got to experience in theaters.
Exactly.
It was wonderful. So
Together.
I am jealous that you got to see Return of the Jedi in theaters.
Well, hopefully you'll see it again for the 50th
Yeah, we'll
in
see you
10 years from 10 years from today or a couple days ago. So I went Rogue today. That was my that was my Rogue One, and now somebody else will do a Rogue Ones. Probably Luke next.
Yeah, I got some stuff I want to go rogue about. A lot of things that I care about and have a lot to say that you guys don't necessarily care as much about. But
Honestly, I think I do. I think I want to do one about practical effects versus CG, mainly so I can have an hour where I can just talk to Luke about this directly in the eye.
I'm down. I mean, yeah, I don't know if that would have to be a rogue one, but I would like to do an episode about that.
needless to say, I think we got a lot of stuff cooking, a lot of stuff in the works. If you've been listening to this and following along, we appreciate it. Stick around. We're going to have a lot more conversations in the future, and a lot more Rogue Ones. We were talking a little bit about ranking the 9 Skywalker saga movies. I'd be very interested to see where those land. Maybe we can give a little teaser real quick. Matt, what's your number 1? Because I'm pretty sure it's Luke's number 9.
A New Hope.
That's not my number 9.
Is that your number 9?
Thank
No.
God.
I thought it was your number 9.
It's near the bottom.
I like how we're...
What is it, 8, 7?
Probably 7.
Oh. Interesting.
I don't want to play my hand too far, but
I think there will be some hot takes and some
There's definitely gotta be some hot
heated discussions during future episodes.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks for listening. I even think we should do the normal... Oh, are you about to stop hitting record?
Did you
Are
already?
you signing out? No, I didn't stop yet.
But your finger's on the...
All right, I'll
on the
move the
Zoom.
finger. Felt like we were doing a wind down there.
Let's do a wind down. And down.